everybody. Welcome to the module on the concept of sustainability. We are now going to look at the second topic of this particular module, which is sustainability and development. In the previous module, we understood the roots of the concept of sustainability. But the way we understand sustainability today tends to be in the context of development. If we want to understand sustainability, therefore, we have to understand what do we mean by development. And what do we mean when we put the idea of sustainability with development? For example, Rio Drin in 1985 called sustainable development an oxymoron, meaning that you can't really put these two concepts together. So let us see if that is true. What do we mean by development? Now, if I were to understand development in its most simple term, I would understand it as gross domestic product, or what we call as GDP. What do we mean by GDP? How much goods and services a particular country can produce. Hence, when you're saying development, you're saying how much can you produce. This is the most simple way of understanding development. In this very simple understanding of development, you also have to know that development can be seen both as a process as well as a means to a particular end. As a process, you're talking about change. Development means changing towards something. And in terms of an ends, we're saying what does it give us? All right, if it's GDP, we're saying it gives us a certain amount of goods and products for a particular country at a particular rate, right? So remember, we're talking of GDP in terms of what development means, a measure of development, and two, the development can be seen both as a process as well as an end in and of itself. This discourse of development became quite interesting post the Second World War. Many people called it a Trojan horse, meaning that it could have anything within it covered by this idea of GDP. One basic concept that drives this idea of development, and that was understood mainly in the first part of the 20th century, was the idea of modernity, meaning where are we going? What do we mean by development? For example, Andhra Pradesh has this new capital of Amravati. What do we want Amravati to look like? We want it to look like Singapore. For example, what do you want India to be in 100 years or say 20 years? You'd say, I want it to be like China, then I want it to be like America. Or if you look at the World Bank, prior to the way they divide countries now, they used to divide countries based on developing, developed, underdeveloped, meaning the underdeveloped countries you assume will become developing, you would assume, would then become developed, right? So this is the idea of modernity. The idea that we are progressing towards something and that there is a point where you are backward and there is a point where you are better off, right? From India to the US. One concept that captures this idea very well is Rostow's stages of economic growth. Now, Rostow comes out with this idea in 1960 and he says there are 5 stages to economic growth. One is traditional societies. Now, traditional societies transition into preconditions for takeoff. That would transition into a takeoff. That would transition into a drive to maturity, and ultimately you would be in the age of high mass consumption, right? So, traditional, preparation for takeoff, the drive to maturity, and ultimately we would be in the age of mass consumption. So you can see this trajectory, a very linear idea of the way we grow. This tends to be very simplistic and it has been critiqued a great deal post the Second World War. Where does this critique come from? It comes mainly from the developing and the underdeveloped world. If development is to mean only economic growth, it kind of leaves to the wayside a lot of other things. For example, the president of Tanzania in 1985 says this: African starvation is topical, meaning everybody talks that Africa is poor, Africa has great number of people who starve. He continues, but the relations between rich and poor countries, which underlies Africa's vulnerability to natural disasters, have been relegated to the sidelines of world discussion. Meaning, you want to talk about starvation in Africa, you're not really willing to say, why is it that Africans are starving? What is the relationship between rich and poor countries that leads to such starvation in Africa and not in America, right? And this critique, a very strong critique, led to the opening up of the meaning of development. One of the main ways that this happened was by the United Nations Millennium Summit in September of 2000, where 8 Millennium Development Goals come in and has 18 targets, 48 indicators, all of them talking about how development has to be seen beyond economic growth. Today we talk of the Sustainable Development Goals, right? All the countries of the world sat together in 2015 and come up with these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But the heart of this widening of the concept of development actually takes place in 1990, where the UNDP recognizes something called as the Human Development Index. It says that development has 3 measures. The first measure is the idea of longevity, meaning life expectancy at birth. Longevity is measured by life expectancy at birth, meaning when a child is born in a particular country, in a particular place, how long do you expect that child to live? This captures a hell of a lot, right? The second measure is literacy. It basically looks at adult literacy, primary, secondary and tertiary level education. Today, in October of 2019, the government of India has released a particular index on education across the different states of our particular country, right? Kerala and Rajasthan apparently are at the top of the list. Why is the government interested in this? Education, again, captures a lot about how developed your particular country is and where it's going in the future. And the third measure is the standard of living. Now, this is measured using GDP. However, it's not measured just using GDP, it's GDP per capita, meaning how many goods and products are you producing according to your population, right? So in terms of GDP per capita, how well off are you? There's truly expanded the idea of development. So development was no longer the simplistic understanding of just gross domestic product, GDP, but rather captured a wider understanding of development. How literate is your country? How long do you expect to live if you are born in a particular country? And how much would you possibly earn in terms of the average of your country, right? And this then went on to inform the SDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. So what is the aim of development then? Basically, it is providing basic needs and increasing the productivity of all resources, human, natural, economic, in countries and maintaining the standard of living, right? So if this is our understanding of development, where does sustainability come in? It is in the 1970s that sustainability joins this discourse on development. In the widening of the understanding of development, the concept of sustainability, as we've understood it from its various roots, joins the lexicon of development. Sharad Lile, in fact, the person whose paper I am relying on for this particular part, says that by the 1990s, Sharad Lile, whose paper I am relying upon for this particular part, in fact said in 1991 that the idea of sustainable development would define the way we understand development in the years to come. And he was right. So what is sustainable development? Remember I talked to you about eco-development? It is this idea of eco-development that first informed sustainable development in the World Conservation Strategy, which was published in 1980. But our understanding of sustainable development comes from a very popular definition that was published in the Brundtland Report, which was called as Our Common Future. It was published in 1987. How does it define sustainable development? I'm sure many of you are familiar with this definition. It states development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Development for the present and the future. Intergenerational equity. However, this seems very vague, right? It seems a very open definition. A more precise definition comes from the UK Forum for the Future, which defines it as a dynamic process which enables all people to realize their potential and improve their quality of life in ways which simultaneously protect and enhance the Earth's life support systems. So you're saying you have development as well as a concern for the environment, and this concern not just for our generation but for future generations as well. Hence, the UNEP concept of sustainable development has certain characteristics. One, it talks of the idea of poverty, and this relationship you will understand in more detail when we go to the module on sustainable development. Two, it talks of the idea of self-reliant development. It talks of the idea of a cost-effective development. It talks of the idea of looking at health. It basically brings in the concerns for the ecosystem within this broader understanding of what development means. Sharad Lile, however, was not satisfied. He said that even if we were to look at these various definitions, they still are very anthropocentric, meaning they put the idea of development for human beings at the forefront and the idea of sustainability and the concept of sustainability behind it. He said, what we have to understand when we're looking at the idea, the concept of sustainability in the context of development is that we have to understand it as something that he defined as ecological sustainability. Now, what did he mean by ecological sustainability? It meant the existence of the ecological conditions necessary to support human life at a specific level of well-being through future generations. Look at what he does. He brings the ecological condition first. He says the existence of a particular set of ecological conditions. That's what will define how much you grow. That's what will define how much you grow, not in terms of your generation, but in future generations as well. A figure that is present in the PPT and in the write-up that has been distributed to you, figure 1, talks of this lexicon, this idea of sustainable development. It brings together the various roots of sustainable development that I spoke to you about in the previous topic, as well as what we've spoken about in this particular topic. It says, when we talk of sustainability, are we saying sustainability of everything, or are we saying sustainability of a particular ecosystem, or are we saying sustainability of societies? When we talk of development, are we saying it as a process of change that's infinite, that it's going to go on in an unlimited direction? Or are we talking about development that has a particular objective in terms of literacy, in terms of meeting basic needs, in terms of also producing goods and services? Lile says that if we're talking about sustainable development in a very open sense, meaning sustainability of everything, and if we understand development as an infinite process, we're not really talking of sustainability at all. However, if we're talking about sustainability in the terms of the ecosystem, the limits of the ecosystem, in the context of societal needs and demands, and seeing it as actually achieving a development end in terms of literacy, in terms of longevity of life, in terms of per capita GDP, then we're actually talking about ecological sustainability. In this particular module, what we have understood is that sustainable development and the idea, the concept of sustainability informed the discourse of development to make up for a broadening of the concept and bringing in the idea of sustainable development that captures different ideas. Sustainable development can be seen as a vague, open cliche, or it can be seen, as Sharad Lile does, as ecological sustainable development or ecological sustainability that pulls from the roots of the concept of sustainability and informs the discourse of development. Thank you.